Okay, I think we're ready to start. I hope this finds you all safe and well. My name is Peter Maravellis, and I'd like to welcome you to City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that continues in the footsteps of City Lights Bookstore's in-store calendar during the shelter-in-place. Though we are unable to hold events at the store, we continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love with online readings, discussions, and forums throughout the month of August and into the fall. We're happy to say that City Lights has finally reopened its doors to the public. Following San Francisco Health Department guidelines, we aim to make our reopening as safe as possible for everyone. But please do come down and visit us. You'll be able to once again browse our stacks. Our business hours are going to be 7 days a week from 12 noon until 8 p.m. We're very excited about our reopening. We've worked very hard to transform the store and to make it more conducive towards visiting in the age of COVID. Our entrance is now on the Broadway side of the building at 271 Columbus. The original entrance is now an exit only, so we encourage everyone, please do wear a mask while visiting. As many of you know, City Lights is a publishing house as well as a bookstore. We continue to publish books in the grand tradition of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Pocket Poet series. Each year we publish poetry, literature and translation, literary fiction, as well as books on current events. We published books this year by Julian Bond, Sam Cox, Mumia Abu-Jamal, also a young adult book about the life of civil rights activist Bayard Rustin, and much, much more. So to learn more about the books we publish, please check them out on our website, www.citylights.com. You can also keep up with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Today's event is also going to be rebroadcast on YouTube at a later time. So if you know anyone that could not make it, please refer them to the City Lights YouTube page for more info. So today's event is being presented by City Lights in conjunction with the cultural services of the French Embassy in the United States and Yale University Press. We are very honored to have with us Bernard-Henri Lévy in conversation with Adam Gopnik. We are celebrating the publishing of Mr. Levy's new book, The Virus in the Age of Madness, published by Yale University Press. In it, he explores the many meanings and metaphors we have assigned to the COVID pandemic, and considers what they may actually reveal to us about ourselves. I mean, it's a very timely, very important book, and City Lights is very, very pleased to be featuring it. Mr. Lévy is a philosopher, activist, filmmaker, and the author of over 30 books. He is widely regarded as one of the West's most important public intellectuals. His books include Who Killed Daniel Pearl, In the Footsteps of Tocqueville, The Spirit of Judaism, amongst many other titles. So joining him tonight is none other than Adam Gopnik. Mr. Gopnik is an award-winning writer, essayist, and since 1986, he has served as a staff writer for The New Yorker, contributing nonfiction, fiction, memoir, and criticism. He is the author of the books Paris to the Moon, Through the Children's Gate, and A Thousand Small Sanities, The Moral Adventure of Liberalism, among other books. There will be a time for a Q&A at the end of our talk. We encourage you all to use the chat function that's located in the lower part of your screens to pose your questions and comments. We're going to be calling questions from there to pose to our guests. So welcome, Bernard-Henri Lévy and Adam Gopnik.
Thank you so much, Peter. It is a pleasure to be under the aegis, if only the virtual aegis, of City Lights Books. It's one of my favorite bookstores. I think we've become acutely conscious in the course of this pandemic of how vital our little citadels of social capital are to all of us, none more important than bookstores and none more important to conserve and preserve. Bernard, my old friend, it is wonderful to see you again, even under this strange and virtual umbrella. As you can see, I have made a small, but only a very small and partial collection of your earlier books behind my head as a kind of altar and totem for today's conversation. It occurs to me that you and I have spoken and debated in Paris, in Los Angeles, in Montreal, many times here in New York, but never actually in San Francisco. Then now we are in virtual San Francisco. So I welcome you from France here, and very much want to talk about and debate your extraordinary new book, which I hold here in the French edition, Si Virus qui rend fou. And I can't help but note that in its leap, its atom leap from French to English, it went from the virus that makes us crazy to the virus that has found itself in a world already crazy, which is, I suspect, the way that most Americans feel. We were already in a state of madness, and the virus makes us still more mad. What strikes me about the book, Bernard, and I was reading it yet again this morning, and it's a beautifully short book. It's a book that's very much in the tradition of the great Enlightenment pamphlets, in the tradition of Diderot and the other great polemicists who offered us intense information and polemic in a seemingly modest and compressed package. It is a telegram of learning. And what strikes me about it, Bernard, is that your real ambition in this book, it seems to me, is not so much to address the hygiene of our health as the hygiene of our heads, to make us understand not so much how we have to behave differently at a practical, pragmatic level in the pandemic, but the traps we have to avoid in thinking about the pandemic, the way in which we may be susceptible to the virus, but we must not become susceptible to the bad moral baggage the virus brings with it. How we must not succumb, as you put in the second page, not so much if we are going to succumb to the pandemic, we must not succumb to the pandemic of fear that it brings with it. So let's talk, I thought at first, about several things where I think we agree strongly, and then maybe move on to places of equally strong disagreement. One of the things I think that's true, that in the writing I've done about the pandemic, and it's reflected in your book just as strongly, is the sense that it is a huge philosophical category mistake to assign moral meaning to the virus, to assign moral meaning to the illness, and that your first opponent in this act of hygiene of the head are all of those people who insist that the virus is coming to us because we deserve it, because it's bringing us a message of environmentalism, or it's bringing us a message of the limits of growth, it's bringing us a message against globalization. That your first target, if you like, in this book is exactly all of those who insist that we see the virus not as a disaster to be managed, but as a moral messenger bringing us essential news. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. What is great with discussing with you, and I'm so happy, by the way, to have this chat with you, this discussion with you again. What is great is that you say it all in a few minutes, and it's always such a joy to have this partnership with my dear friend Adam Gopnik. Yes, you are right. You are right on the 2 points. First of all, it's a book of philosophy. It's not a book of medicines. About medicine, I trust the doctors. I trust the science, with all the limits, of course, of the science, which the scientists themselves know. But I trust them, and I don't go in their. I don't mix myself with their discoveries, with their uncertainties, with their recommendations. And in France, to be very clear, I globally obeyed to the sanitary regulations which were recommended by the doctors. Even if I doubted some of them, I decided to trust, because I trust, I respect, I revere the scientists. But on the philosophical level, this is my field, and this is the subject of the book. And you are right on the second point. My main target is probably those who make the fantasy of a thinking virus, an intelligent virus, a virus as not as a metaphor, as Susan Sontag, your friend, would have said, but as a messenger. This idea of the virus being the messenger of warning or whatever number one, seems to me an insult to the victims, a profanation to the very human condition, and an epistemological idiocy, absurdity. And it is this absurdity, this epistemological mistake, you find it on all sides, or on the two sides of the political spectrum. Of course, you have the environmentalists who say the virus comes in order to punish you because you violated too much the nature and so on. But you have that also on the right. I know that at the minute we are speaking, we have some, maybe next weekend, next Sunday, some neo-evangelical churches where you will have some priests, some pastors saying to their audience that they are punished because they were too liberals, because they accepted abortion, because they all this stuff of the extreme right. So the target of the book is that. It is a defense of the liberal values in front of extreme right, extreme left, being united in this stupid, absurd idea of the virus having a meaning and conveying the meaning to the poor sinners who we are.
Right. Absolutely, Bernard. Let me press down a little bit on the first side of that, the environmentalists' case, and see if I can make their case somewhat more rigorously. How do you respond in the terms of this book to those who say, and we hear them in America all the time, and I think we hear them even more vehemently in France, the virus became produced because of the violation of the boundaries of nature in China. Industrialization pushed the Chinese wilderness beyond the point of tolerance, and the virus came back out from wild animals into humankind as a consequence of that. And that is actually, the way this argument goes, that is not an epistemological error, that's a biological fact, that because of our despoiling of nature, nature takes its natural revenge and sends these illnesses back towards us. And that in that sense, it really is a message to which we can add that the reality that because of the virus, we've had to narrow down, eliminate our own pollution of the environment, and that's a positive good thing. So that the virus is indeed a message from nature saying, do not rape me any further, and that the lesson that we're learning is the lesson that the less we do on a planetary scale, the healthier it is for the planet. How do you respond to those two very familiar arguments?
This is not what happened in China. What happened in China was the proximity, the cooking of wild animals, and the too big proximity between wild animals and humanity and so on. And this has nothing to do neither with modernity, nor with globalization, nor to the raping of the limits between which modernity implies. This attitude, this behavior regarding chauve-souris, I don't know the word in English, and pangolin, this is
bats. And
I would even say that it is a remnant, yes, it is a remnant of the very archaic and the pre-globalization order of things in China. It has nothing to do with that, number one. Number two, of course, you have in the huge quantity of viruses which we have to deal with, you have some which are accelerated by the globalization. You have some which are oppositely eliminated by globalization. You have some who did in the 14th century decimate, destroy humanity without globalization. So globalization, of course, is a different context, but it does not make more viruses, it makes different viruses, and so on. And number three, as for myself, I did not wait the virus to think that the nature has to be respected, that global warming has to be stopped. I always knew that. And all decent liberals in the world knew that. They did not need a virus messenger. And last point, the danger of thinking like this, the virus as a warning, is that what do you do when you have a warning, like in a train? You stop. You put the brakes on and you stop everything. And I really believe that about these matters, global warming, globalization, bad regulation of globalization, we need a patient, steady work, and certainly not an emergency
full stop, an emergency break.
And apocalyptic full stop. And this emergency full stop can create, on the very grounds we are speaking now, more disease than good.
Right. You said, Bernard, a moment ago in the beginning that you have no quarrel with science, and certainly none with the doctors. But certainly in the book, you do spend some time criticizing, you say it's our passage from the model of the welfare state to the model of the hospital state. In other words, to the idea that we are giving too much authority, we are lending too much authority to the men in the white coats and suspending our critical faculties. And you make great use in an immensely provocative way of the work of Michel Foucault, the great French historian of science, to say that the idea that we should surrender to the Lumière, that we should give over our moral judgment to quantifiable, rational, calculable science is an error. You do believe that. You do make that case strongly in this book, even though, as you say, you certainly are prepared to follow the expertise of the scientific elite.
I said two things. Number one, the doctors, I respect them when they cure. I don't want to give the society to give them the power. This arbitrage, this question has been refereed since Plato 2,400 years ago in a great dialogue called The Politique. He asked the question, who should govern the city, the politics or the doctors? He says, the politics, after listening, of course, the doctors, among others, number one. Number two, what Michel Foucault says is that if we give the power not to the doctors, but to the medicine, we may create a form of discipline, a form of governance, a form of one-day dictatorship, which, at least of authority, which can be one of the most terrible because based on data, on science, on all this stuff, number two. And number three, what I say is that all those who know a little of epistemology, medicine, and science know that the worst, there is two bad behaviors. The one is to alternative facts believers to say that they don't believe in science. This is completely, of course, stupid and criminal. But you have another mistake, which is to have a magical behavior regarding science. To consider the science as a sort of magie. How do you say magie? Magic.
It's as big a mistake to worship science as to despise science.
despise science is a mistake. Magical belief in science is another mistake. I don't know which is the worst. We are grown up enough, and we are great enough, us women and men, human beings, to avoid both of them. I don't see why we should accept one instead of the other.
Yes, one of my favorite expressions, Bernard, in French that you actually taught me is grown-up people should count to two, that it's possible to count to two and not always to one. One of the pleasures of reading this book, Bernard, and I don't want, though it is, as I say, it's a polemic in the great 18th century tradition, it's also one of the pleasures always of reading your work are the immensely erudite and provocative digressions that rise up in it. They're not truly digressive from the main point, but they're hugely surprising. One of my favorite passages in this book involves your discovery of an old Jewish malediction in which it said, all doctors go to hell, all doctors are damned. And you went to work to try and understand why that would rise, why that malediction, the doctor is damned, would rise as a piece of Talmudic lore.
The quote is, the Talmudist wise men don't say all doctors, they say the best doctors will go to hell, best doctors. And of course, it is very strange, very strange and counterintuitive sentence, and even shocking. And I know this quote seems long, but when I thought about it, I thought, in time of pandemics, what the hell can those rabbis mean? And I went through a few classical interpretation by the Meiri, by Rashi, by most of the great Jewish thinkers. All of them has an interpretation, but the best one is the one of the Moral de Prague, who says that what the Talmud calls the best doctor is the one who has an absolute and perfect technicity in order to treat and to deal with the organs of the body, with the organs composing the body. His technicity is so sharp and so acute and so absolute that he dives into this organicity, and he dives so much that he considers my body as made only of organs, and he thinks my being made only of body, and by so doing he forgets this old wisdom, which is that a human being is a mix of flesh and intelligence, is a mix of organicity and sophistication, is a mix of fatality and of freedom, and all of that. And because of this forgetting, because of this, because they forget that, then the Moral of Prague says they deserve to go to hell because they deny what is the difference between a human being and a stone, or a human being and a pangolin, or an animal. This is what they say. And I really believe that, and I believe that one of the risks of the current situation on a philosophical level is exactly that, is to consider ourselves and to consider our neighbors as packs of organicity, of packs of flesh, which have to be dealt with only on, or mainly as flesh which has to be safe. And I think that this is a great danger, because it is, we cross all the inner heritage of the battles for freedom, the battles for rights, and all the Enlightenment tradition.
Yes, and that's essential to your book, is the idea that if we define ourselves only in terms of our health and our capacity to live some indefinite period of time, we deny our mortality and we ignore the moral universe around us. And if we concentrate too narrowly on our own flesh and blood, literally, on our own carnality. Bernard, I want to transition to some questions about the pragmatic consequences of your view, but just while we're talking about the philosophical premises of it, there's one other section of the book that I found enormously provocative and important, and that is where you challenge the view that there's a certain kind of personal transcendence that we can find in quarantine and in isolation. That's a very a fertile vein of American writing just now. It sometimes can be, popular writing. I thought I was going to be miserable in the isolation of my apartment, but in fact, I found myself reading Tolstoy and listening to Beethoven, and I became a better person. But it also extends to more serious writing, where people say that the positive side of this pandemic, the message that it's sending us, is that we have become overwhelmed with false connections, with false intimacies, and being thrown back on ourselves is a positive good. Being thrown back into our own isolation is a spiritual message that puts us in contact with all of our great spiritual predecessors, from Pascal to Genet to all the great prison writing. And you reject that categorically as a false idea. And I wonder if you can explain why you feel so strongly that that line of thought is dangerous and even fatal.
Number one, it is absurd, because Pascal never said that it was a rule of life and that it was a good to focus on himself. It was for him a terrible test and a terrible, nearly unaffordable and unsufferable experience, and certainly not a quiet, smooth way of life. Number one. Number two, because again, I belong to a tradition that thinks that the most serious transcendence is not to reconnect with yourself, but to reconnect with the others, and not to go back to your intimacy, but to expel yourself from your intimacy in order to reach your close or remote others. I really believe that. I said I belong to a tradition. It is not even a tradition. I think that all the wisdoms and the philosophies you and me, probably most of the people who are here with us respect, say that in a way or in another. The Greeks, when they say that the human being is a political animal, it's exactly what they mean. That he acts and he realizes he accomplishes himself, or she accomplishes himself, only by policy. Had 1 minute in the moment of doubt, but he was in such a hurry to go back to politics, to mathematics, stem out of his own self. Phenomenology, from Husserl to Sartre, what did they say except that a self is nothing respectable? A self is nothing but a point of departure in order to take care of the others, and take care not just by meditation, by activism, by doing, by practicing, by dealing with the real joys and miseries of the real world. So from whatever point you take the story, I don't see how to focus on yourself, to concentrate on your inner self can be a valuable way of life. It has been, and it can be again an obligation, of course, a medical obligation, and again, I respected it, but certainly not a way of being which has to be praised, or we decide to put egoism at the top, at the peak of the human practices and values, which I refuse absolutely.
Thank you, Bernard. I wanted to sort of move at this point a little bit from the philosophical premises of your investigation to their pragmatic consequences, because everything you're saying is not just abstract philosophy. What you're talking about is how we should conduct ourselves at this moment of crisis. And one of the places where it seems to me that the philosophical reflection and the pragmatic and the practice come together is in a very simple question, which, as you know, is completely violent and controversial here in America. That's the question of the mask, of wearing a mask. If I understand you correctly, though you're prepared to wear a mask of necessity, you hate its overtones. You dislike the necessity. Not only do you we all dislike the necessity, but you deeply morally dislike the necessity, exactly for the reasons that you cite the great French Jewish philosopher Lévinas. Humanity begins when we confront the face of the other, not when we avoid it. And it doesn't matter whether we're avoiding it out of fear of germs or we're avoiding it out of fear of the exposure of female flesh, that's a fundamental sin. But couldn't you make the opposite case, Bernard, in a sense, and say that wearing a mask is really a form of displaying the social contract? That when I wear a mask and I walk out on the streets of New York, not only am I engaged in some form of protection, but I'm signaling to people, I will try to avoid infecting you, and I expect you to avoid infecting me. I will limit my liberty while as you limit your liberty, so that we can work together for the common good. So isn't it possible to see the use of the mask and the necessity of the mask not as limiting or dehumanizing practice, but as something that reminds us of the core values of the social contract that enables us to live as a community?
I believe both, Adam. I believe that, of course, in times of pandemics, to care of the other supposes that you make a mask, you put a mask. Okay, but I believe also that if we were to wear masks forever, we will just enter in another sort of human relationship, another sort of ethics, another sort of consideration of the other. It would just be another humanity. And what I believe is that humanity without mask is better, is more civilized, is more caring, really caring, than humanity with mask. And not only because of Lévinas. Lévinas, of course, makes all his conception of ethics on this idea of the face-to-face, and that the sense of infinity is given by a naked face. Even without going to Lévinas, again, all the old wisdoms and the new wisdom from Greeks to modernity say that humanity is just searching another reason to hate the other, another reason to distrust the other, is just searching for another reason to spy or to the other. and that the mask, if it was due to last and to settle in our relationships, will go in this sense. So I just hope that we are numerous to hope that we will get rid of the mask. That's what I say practically. I will wear the mask. Today, I was in the city where I am. I was doing some shopping. Of course, I put the mask. Number one, because it is the rule, and number two, because for the reasons you say. But my God, I prayed for my city to be back to normal. Normal means with all the fragilities and all the strengths of it, normal relationships, eyes in eyes, without disguise, with as little lies as possible. Mask, social distancing. I know that social distancing is necessary at this moment, but I know also that I spent all my bloody life fighting social distance, because social distance means also despise, inequality, and so on. I don't want social distancing becoming the rule. Shake hands.
I was about, you wrote a very funny thing, which after this book was written, a charming brief piece about the history of the handshake and about what it represents, because you were condemned for shaking hands on a plateau on television not long ago.
Absolutely. For me, shaking hands is a little gesture, but a huge symbol of civilization. It means peace. It means equality between two women, two men, a woman, a man, on the same rank, and not one of the two deciding to look down at the other. Shaking hands is a great gesture, and when shaking hands came in Western modernity, at least, it meant a lot. It meant less despise, less hate, less war, and more liberalism in the most noble sense of the word. So I hope, I pray, I beg that all this comes back to normal as soon as possible. And my book is a warning for that, a prayer for that, prayer to pray.
To do.
P-R-A-Y.
I know we have people in our large audience who want to ask questions too, but that leads very naturally your prayer to what is probably the most difficult reflection that your book evokes in me, and one that I'll struggle to articulate well. There's one way you can read this book as saying, listen, pandemics are part of the human condition. Illness is part of the human condition. Mortality is the human condition. It defines the human condition. And that therefore, instead of running away from that reality, we have to accept it as part of the human condition. We have to engage in rational risk-taking, but it will be risk-taking in any case. We have to turn our attention away from our preoccupation with our own health to a larger preoccupation with all the other events on the planet that we're missing right now, which is something you emphasize. There's a way in which this book can be read to say, stop being frightened, embrace the world, walk back out into the world, and give up the terror. That there's a kind of, there's a radical way of reading this book which says, open the schools, open the colleges, go back out into the world. We cannot evade our own mortality. We cannot evade the presence of illness, and the cost of that evasion is greater than any prolongation of our life can provide. Isn't that, in a sense, part of what you actually believe in your heart about this moment in history?
I don't say the cost, no, but I believe that, of course, we have to cure the pandemic as much as we can, but not if the result of that is the loss of all that of what we did fight for during the last decades. If the result of the cure is to get rid of the world, to say farewell to the rest of the planet, to say to the more wretched and poor among the poor, do your own business. We are with our prosperity, our apartment, and we send you to hell. I don't want that. That's absolutely true, and I really believe, yes, that the progress of the moment we live is that we have some means to control the pandemic. This is sure, and it is good to control, to flat the curve, to avoid some deaths, but not if the result is to enter in a new age of the world, which turns its back to all the humanistic values. Yes, and I say, let's go back to work. And the first thing I did when the French law authorized me to do, the first thing I did, when the confinement was lifted, my first act was to go to the most cursed and damned place in Europe, which is the refugee camp, the migrants camp of Lesbos in Greece. The first plane possible, I took it. And I went to connect to embrace these disgraced people who are considered like absolute outlaws.
Just to clarify, Bernard, people, this is the island of Lesbos, the Greek island of Lesbos, which has had an enormous influx of refugees from Africa, particularly.
Absolutely. And
who are
they
abandoned there, largely abandoned there.
And for them, for these 20,000 people, the lockdown means jail and hell, and proper hell, not metaphorical. And I wanted to bear testimony for them. I wanted to express my brotherhood with them. I wanted to break my confinement in order to express to them and to express to my country that we share the same humanity. Really, practically, not in Blaise Pascal principle, practically.
Mm-hmm. Is there a COVID epidemic on Lesbos, or is it that so far behind every other problem they're confronting that they haven't even made much of it?
The tragic irony is that they suffer a total lockdown, which means the worst for them, and that when you ask to the International Rescue Committee, to the French or American medical NGO who are in the camp, there is nearly no case of COVID. They have a lot of other things. They have stabbing at night, they have cholera, they have mortal, lethal diarrhea. They have a lot of they have no proper bathroom. They have a mortality of babies, which is, but no COVID. But the COVID has been used by the government of Greece in order to implement the lockdown of which the government dreamt of, but never dared to impose. They did. And the COVID was the argument. Yeah.
Yes.
As it is an argument in Hungary for Viktor Orban deciding state emergency and so on.
Yes. One of the points you make in the book, Bernard, which I think is an urgent one, is that our preoccupation with the pandemic has an enormous cost in human rights. China presumably could not have come down so hard in Hong Kong if the whole world were not preoccupied with our own health rather than with the health of the human rights of the people of Hong Kong.
There is a chapter in the book where I make the list of big events regarding human rights which happened unnoticed, under the radar, during 1 week, where in France there was only one news, which
One
was
subject,
COVID.
right?
One subject, and I make the list, yes, in terms of human rights, of increase of inequalities, of mortality by hunger, humanitarian disaster in refugee camps, not only of democratic and distress in countries of Europe like Hungary and Poland, how all these illiberal regimes took advantage of. I make the list, and the list is terrible. There was a sort of anesthesia of all the Democrats and liberals in Europe, which opened the door to the worst.
Yes, that's a good, yes, an anesthesia, exactly, a moral anesthesia in our preoccupation with the pandemic. Let me, if I may, go to some of the questions, if I may. How do you view the controversy about hydroxychloroquine among medical scientists alone? It's a good example, Bernard, of the kinds of the pragmatic questions that we're confronted with every day. Right, as you said, one of the things that makes science science is that it's a system of disputation. It's not a monolithic knowledge. But then do we not run the risk of Trumpism? That is, of saying, oh, the elite knows nothing, the experts know nothing, trust me and my patent medicine and my miracle cure, that will get you well. Don't we run the risk in disputing science of undermining expertise?
No. I think it is the opposite. It is when we consider the science as magic that we take the risk of reversing the whole thing, and when we are disappointed, turning our back to it. No, science has to be considered as it is, as the scientists themselves say, which is a honest search of the truth, which fulfills its goal in part, but not completely, which does not deliver the truth at the revered, at the providential authority. The scientists search, and the truth is the medical truth is a patient, difficult search, which has to be respected as such. You say Trump. Look at the difference between two Republican presidents, Trump and George W. Bush. When there was a disputation in America at the time of Bush about the treatment for AIDS, and the tree therapy, and so on and so on. At least at this time, whatever thought George W. Bush, he did let the doctors act and prescribe. And as you know, at the end of the day, it was during his mandate that one of the most ambitious plans of fight against AIDS was formulated and undertaken.
In Africa.
So
yes.
In Africa, yeah, in Africa, and then continued by Clinton. This is a good attitude to know that science is a process, to trust the process, but not to consider the process as a sort of totemic creed.
Mm-hmm. Someone else here says, could you talk, and this is something about the history, and this is something that comes up in the book, and it's something you and I have spoken about. Is it not predictable every time that there has been a plague in human history, it's been used to support some particular political ideology, that we are susceptible? This is the point Camus makes in La Peste, is that we immediately interpret plagues as political messages. Is this not one episode in a very long history? Someone wants to know.
You are right. It's exactly the risk, and it is the risk which we have the responsibility to warn about, to warn and to try to avoid. Camus says that. Malaparte said it in the Skin. There is always this risk. Yeah.
Yes. Someone asks, and oddly enough, Bernard, it's something that comes up on the second page of your book, the Hong Kong flu in 1969, the killed between 1 and 4 million people worldwide, and yet there was no confinement and no interference in daily life. You mentioned this because you were not only alive, but it was right after the events of May 68, so you were alive and very much well and seeing the world. There was no confinement, no interference in daily life. Why did we treat a major pandemic so differently then? I.e., why did we not disturb the social contract of our humanity in favor of just concentrating on the needs of the human body? Neil Ann asks.
There is two reasons. One is good, and the other is not good. The good reason is that we are probably more, we are certainly more demanding and more requiring today than 40 years ago about what medicine can. What medicine can, medicine has to do it. And this is great. This is a progress. But what is not a progress is that in 1969, when the Hong Kong flu arrived, the liberal values, the liberal fights were much more vivid than today. There was some struggles for freedom, for civil rights, for equality between women and men, for all of that, which occupied a big part of the mental screens of these years. I remember so well this time of the Hong Kong flu. We cared about the Hong Kong flu, but we certainly did not want to accept that the flu could be a pretext allowing to stop the process which started 1 year before with May 68 and all that was happening also in America and so on.
And in Prague Spring, yes.
Yeah, and we were really conscious of this duality. We knew that we had to fight the flu, probably not enough, but we wanted to pursue, we wanted to continue in all the anti-authoritarian, anti-totalitarian, and pro-equality fights of this time. And I think we were right. If we had the flu of 68, 69 lasted 2 years, I really believe that if we had condemned to silence all this effervescence, ebullience of thought, it would have been a loss, a real loss for Western civilization, because it would not, this sort of things you don't catch up. If it is lost, it is lost. If we had left in 1968, 69, 70, an hygienic state to confine us to our homes, to prevent the most adventurous of us to go to Bangladesh or to go to South America or to fight against Pinochet, I think it would have been a loss for the Western world and for the liberal values.
I think we're seeing that right now, Bernard, in Hong Kong. That is, we are never going to recuperate. There was a great mass movement for liberal values in Hong Kong, which has now been brutally repressed, and it will not reverse itself. And clearly the Chinese government took advantage of the panic of the pandemic to act in that way, because they knew that the world would be preoccupied. And as you say, that's not a momentum we will ever reverse, I suspect.
I think so. I think so. And the events of today, with the arrest of this great tycoon of press in Hong Kong, is a sign of that. And there is no protest, of course, of White House, but even in the liberal Facebook groups, which I can observe, I don't see an uprising of revolt against the arrest of a man who embodies the liberal values in Hong Kong. We really bow down this Chinese decision. We consider that as a sort of fatality. And I cannot prevent myself from seeing that as an effect of this commotion, of this paralysis, of this anesthesia where we are. In 1969, we would not have accepted that.
This might be a good place, Bernard, because I see we're coming to an end of our time to ask this, because this sums up what was going to be my last question for you too. Kathy Ryder asks, what is the best way to combat moral anesthesia during the pandemic? I was going to say to you, if you had the ear of, I wouldn't expect you ever to have the ear of the President of the United States, but if you had the ear of the President of France or the President of, or the Premier of Germany, what would you as a philosopher advise them to do to, on the one hand, continue to fight the pandemic and at the same time not to surrender to the pandemic of fear? What are the specific things you would tell them if you were Cardinal Richelieu to the king?
I would recommend them to fight, of course, but without putting people into panic, without considering us as children who can only be terrorized, that we are able to understand why it is important to wear a mask when we go in a public space, and that for that, we don't have to be beaten with a stick of the perpetual terror of the recommendation of the sanitary authorities to consider us as adults. And I would recommend a second thing: if I were, if I had the ear not only of my president but also of the TV of the medias, I would recommend to reserve a space, a reasonable and important space in the news to the news of the rest of the world, and not to have us suffocate under this bombing of the same news, all in a loop, saying on and on and on, that we are facing the most unprecedented pandemic of the modern history, which is not true. It is not unprecedented. It is terrible. It is tragic. It has to be fought with determination and sense of tragic, but it is not unprecedented. And there are other evils in the rest of the world which we have to try to fight again at the same time. This is what I would ask to our CNN in France, which is called BFM or CNews.
Yes.
I would ask them to say that on and on.
Thank you, Bernard. I wish you were saying
Thank you, my dear Adam.
one of the things talking about, you know, the one encouraging piece of news I've been sharing with my children and others is that historically, if you think about it, the end result of pandemics has often been very surprising. The Black Death came in Europe in the 14th century. In Florence, destroyed half the population. And 40 years later, Florence was the most dynamic, creative city in the history of mankind. And when we had the Spanish flu here in New York in 1918-19, it didn't produce disaster, it produced the Jazz Age. It produced the work of Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong and all of that great efflorescence of culture. So with that little note of optimism that pandemics sometimes have providential second acts, I thank you for all of us here in America, and bless you, my friend, and let's talk again soon.
Well,
Thanks to all of you.
That is all we have time for today. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Bernard-Henri Lévy, Adam Gopnik. Also, a big thank you to Juliette Donadieu, to Anne-Sophie Armil, Algance Majoub, Hannah Angeli of the French Cultural Services, also Emily Hamilton for all her efforts, and to Brenda King of Yale University Press. They all helped make this happen today, so a very big thank you as well to all of you who are attending. Please do use the links we've posted for purchasing the book. It really does help out City Lights in the age of COVID. You know, we're in Indy and we're struggling like anybody else. To learn more about our upcoming events, please visit us at www.citylights.com. We look forward to having you join us again in the near future. So everyone, have an excellent day. One and all, be safe.
Thank you. Be safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.